Clint Eastwood was walking the red carpet at his Gran Torino premiere when he suddenly stopped, turned around, and walked away from 500 reporters. What he saw in the crowd left the entire Hollywood elite speechless. It was December 9th, 2008, at the Warner Brothers Studios lot in Burbank, California. The premiere of Gran Torino was one of the most anticipated events of the year. Clint wasn't just the director and star. At 78 years old, he'd announced this might be his last acting role. Every major entertainment outlet was there. Steven Spielberg, Morgan Freeman, and dozens of Hollywood legends had come to honor Clint's career. The red carpet stretched 200 feet, lined with photographers, entertainment reporters, and fans pressed against metal barriers. Clint had been walking that carpet for 40 minutes, stopping for interviews, posing for photos, greeting fellow actors. He was wearing his signature understated style. Simple black suit, no tie, that weathered face that somehow looked both tough and kind. What nobody at that premiere knew was that behind the barriers in the back row of the crowd, where security had pushed him, sat a man in a wheelchair who had been waiting 6 hours just to catch a glimpse of Clint Eastwood. James Patterson was 64 years old, but he looked 80. The Vietnam War had taken his legs in 1971. The years since had taken nearly everything else: his marriage, his home, his health. He lived in a VA facility in North Hollywood, sharing a room with 3 other veterans, surviving on a disability check that barely covered his medications. But James had one thing that kept him going: Clint Eastwood movies, specifically war movies and movies about broken men finding redemption. Gran Torino was about a Korean War veteran confronting his past and finding purpose in his final years. James had read every review, watched every trailer. The character of Walt Kowalski, angry, damaged, searching for meaning, was him. This movie wasn't entertainment for James Patterson. It was a mirror. His daughter, Lisa Patterson, a 38-year-old nurse working 2 jobs, had saved for 3 months to rent a wheelchair-accessible van and drive her father to the premiere. She knew they couldn't get inside. Premiere tickets were invitation only, reserved for industry people and press, but she thought maybe, just maybe, if they waited by the barriers, her father could see Clint in person just once, just for a moment. They'd arrived at 2 p.m. for an 8 p.m. premiere. Security had initially told them to leave. The area was for credentialed press only. Lisa had begged. She'd explained about her father, about Vietnam, about what Clint's movies meant to him. A sympathetic security guard had let them stay in the back behind everyone else where they wouldn't be in the way. James couldn't see much from where they were positioned. The crowd was too thick and his wheelchair was too low. But he could hear the shouting, could see the camera flashes, could feel the energy of something important happening just 50 feet away. "Is he there yet?" James kept asking his daughter. "Not yet, Dad," Lisa would answer, checking her phone for updates on the arrivals. Soon, at 7:45 p.m., the crowd erupted. Clint Eastwood had arrived. Through the chaos of photographers and reporters, Lisa caught a glimpse of that familiar figure, tall, silver-haired, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who'd walked 1,000 red carpets. "He's here, Dad," Lisa said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Clint's here." James tried to crane his neck, tried to see through the wall of people in front of him. All he could make out were flashes of movement, the back of heads, the glow of camera lights. "Can you see him?" James asked desperately. Lisa stood on her toes, holding up her phone to try to get a photo. "Anything. He's so far away, Dad. I'm sorry. There are too many people." James Patterson felt something break inside him. He'd been shot in the jungle, had survived 3 surgeries to save what was left of his legs, had endured 40 years of phantom pain and nightmares, and the slow erosion of everything he'd once been. He'd survived all of that. But somehow being 50 feet away from the man whose movies had kept him alive and not being able to see him, that felt like the final defeat. A single tear ran down James's weathered face. Lisa saw it and felt her heart shatter. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought we could." "It's okay, sweetheart," James said quietly. "It's okay. At least we tried." What neither James nor Lisa knew was that at that exact moment, Clint Eastwood was finishing an interview with Entertainment Tonight, standing in the middle of the red carpet, surrounded by lights and cameras and the controlled chaos of a major premiere. The interviewer was asking him about Walt Kowalski's character arc, about redemption, about finding purpose in darkness. Clint was giving a thoughtful answer about how the movie was really about confronting your demons before it's too late. And then over the interviewer's shoulder through a gap in the crowd, Clint saw something that made him stop mid-sentence. A wheelchair in the back behind all the barriers where someone had clearly been pushed to make room for more important people. And in that wheelchair, a man in a worn military jacket, his face turned away, his shoulders shaking in a way that suggested he was crying. Clint had played countless tough guys, had directed films about war and violence, and hard men in impossible situations. But there was something about seeing that veteran in the wheelchair alone in a crowd of thousands that reached into his chest and grabbed something he usually kept carefully protected. "Excuse me," Clint said to the interviewer, not waiting for a response. He turned away from the camera, away from the lights, away from the 500 reporters and photographers who had been fighting for his attention. He walked directly toward the metal barriers, toward the back of the crowd, toward the man in the wheelchair. The crowd parted in confusion. Entertainment reporters exchanged bewildered looks. Steven Spielberg, watching for the VIP section, leaned forward with interest. Security guards instinctively moved to intercept Clint, thinking there was a threat. "It's fine," Clint said to security, his voice calm but firm. "Let me through." He reached the barrier where James and Lisa were standing. The people around them suddenly realized who was approaching and erupted in excited shouting. Cameras swiveled. Reporters started running. But Clint's attention was focused entirely on the man in the wheelchair whose face was still turned away, whose daughter was staring at Clint with an expression of pure shock. "Sir," Clint said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You're a veteran, aren't you?" James Patterson slowly turned his head, not quite believing what he was hearing. When he saw Clint Eastwood standing 3 feet away, looking directly at him, his mouth opened but no sound came out. "Vietnam?" Clint asked gently. James managed to nod. Clint glanced at the barriers, at the security guards, at the absurdity of metal bars separating him from this man. Then he did something that would be replayed on news channels for weeks. He vaulted over the barrier with surprising agility for a 78-year-old man and knelt down beside James' wheelchair. The crowd gasped. Cameras exploded in flashes. Warner Brothers executives started frantically talking into their headsets. "What's your name?" Clint asked, ignoring everything happening around them. "James," the veteran managed to whisper. "James Patterson, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines." "James," Clint repeated, putting his hand on the man's shoulder. "Thank you for your service." "Truly." James started crying. Not quiet tears now, but deep shaking sobs. Lisa knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her own face. "Mr. Eastwood," Lisa said, "you have no idea what this means. Your movies, they've kept him going. Especially this one. He relates to Walt Kowalski so much. We just wanted to see you for a moment. We didn't mean to. How long have you been waiting here?" Clint interrupted. "Since 2 p.m., Lisa admitted. Clint looked at James, then at the wheelchair, then back at the premiere entrance where 2,000 people in tuxedos and gowns were waiting for him to start the screening. "James," Clint said, "have you seen a movie yet?" James shook his head. "No, sir. We couldn't get tickets. We just wanted to be here where it was happening." Clint was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to one of the security guards who had followed him. "Get David," he said, referring to David Webb, the film's producer. "Clint, the premiere is supposed to start in 10 minutes, the guard said nervously. "Then you better get David quickly," Clint replied, his tone suggesting this wasn't a request. 2 minutes later, David Webb was standing beside Clint at the barrier, looking stressed and confused. The red carpet interviews had completely stopped. Every camera was now pointed at whatever was happening in the back corner with Clint Eastwood and the veteran in the wheelchair. "David," Clint said calmly, "we're delaying the start." "What?" "Clint, we can't." "We're delaying the start," Clint repeated. "Because James here is going to watch this movie tonight, and he's going to watch it from the front row, and I'm going to sit next to him. Do we understand each other?" David Webb had worked with Clint long enough to know when an argument was pointless. He nodded and pulled out his phone. "Also," Clint continued, I need you to find out what VA facility James lives in and what his situation is. Can you do that?" David looked at Lisa, who was now openly sobbing. "Yes," he said, "I can do that." What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in premiere history. Clint didn't just get James Patterson a seat in the theater. He personally pushed the wheelchair up the red carpet, past the photographers, past the reporters, past Steven Spielberg and Morgan Freeman, and every celebrity in attendance. Warner Brothers executives scrambled to rearrange the front row seating. Lisa walked beside her father, still unable to believe this was happening. When they reached the theater entrance, Clint stopped and addressed the crowd of celebrities and press. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive Clint Eastwood authority. "This is James Patterson. He served in Vietnam with the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. He's seen things none of us have seen, sacrificed things none of us have sacrificed. And tonight, he's watching this movie from the front row. Because if anyone deserves to see a story about a veteran finding peace, it's an actual veteran who's been searching for it for 40 years. The premiere audience, Hollywood's toughest, most jaded crowd, erupted in applause. But it wasn't polite, obligatory applause. People were standing. Some were crying. Clint pushed James into the theater and positioned his wheelchair in the front row center section. He sat in the seat directly next to him. Lisa sat on James' other side. "You ready?" Clint asked James. "I don't know what to say," James whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Clint replied. "Just watch the movie." For the next 2 hours, Clint Eastwood sat in the theater watching a movie he directed and starred in, but his attention was mostly on James Patterson's face. He watched the veteran react to every scene, watched him flinch during the violence, watched him nod during Walt Kowalski's struggle with his past, watched him cry during the redemption arc. When the movie ended, the theater erupted in applause. But James wasn't clapping. He was staring at the screen, processing what he'd just seen. Clint turned to him. "What did you think?" James looked at Clint with red, swollen eyes. "That was me," he said simply. "That was my whole life. The anger, the loneliness, the feeling like I survived the war, but died anyway. But the ending," he paused, struggling with his words. "The ending gave me something I didn't know I needed." "What's that?" Clint asked. "Hope," James said. "Hope that it's not too late. That I can still matter. James, you've always mattered. Some of us just needed a reminder to notice." After the screening at the after-party that Clint briefly attended before leaving, he pulled David Webb aside. "I need you to do something for me," Clint said. "Find out everything about James' situation at the VA, medical care, housing, everything. And I need you to quietly establish a fund that covers whatever gaps exist. Don't make it public. Don't make a news story. Just make sure he has what he needs." "How much are we talking?" David asked. "Whatever it takes," Clint replied. "And David, find out about other veterans in similar situations. I want to know how many James Pattersons are out there who can't even make it to a movie premiere." Over the next 3 months, Clint worked with VA organizations to identify veterans who were falling through the cracks, those who had housing insecurity, inadequate medical care, or social isolation. He quietly funded a program that provided assistance and connection for veterans in the Los Angeles area. James Patterson became the first beneficiary, but he was far from the last. Clint arranged for James to move from the shared VA facility to a small apartment with proper accessibility features. He covered the costs of medical treatments that James' VA benefits didn't fully address. He even got James a part-time job